Welcome to the Memento Mori Fight Club. My name is Fidel.
And my name is Mary. And today we have special guest Becky coming on to talk to us about a lot of people's favorite topic, food.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So we wanted to bring you on because it's like, the podcast is about suffering and people think like, what does food have to do with anything? But I think especially like in our society, there's so many just like diets and fads and fitness videos and just all these things. And I feel like, especially as Americans, we've developed really bad habits with food or like overly restrictive habits with food. And like our relationship with food is kind of, just all over the place, depending on who you talk to. So we just wanted to have you on. So Becky, wherever you feel comfortable kind of starting your story and telling us that, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I guess I can start at the beginning, and if I go too long, you can stop me and ask questions. We'll see how this goes. So I guess growing up as a kid, I would have a lot of stomach pains. So I remember one time clearly laying on the floor of my bedroom, like curled up in a ball because my stomach hurt so bad. And I couldn't quite identify why or what was going wrong. I grew up in a household where my mom was very health conscious. And so she did a great job of making sure that we didn't have a whole lot of junk food. I don't ever remember like having sodas or chips and all the things that are considered like highly processed foods. We didn't have a whole lot of that. However, we did grow up in the 90s. And so I remember a lot of diets of trying new diet foods that were low fat, that type of thing as a kid. And then I guess when I got to high school, I realized I really enjoyed science, especially biology. It was my favorite subject. And so for a while, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I pursued that for a little while until I realized that I pass out very easily, especially at the sight of blood.
Maybe doctor's not the best.
Maybe doctor's not the best. And so then I thought, what am I interested in? I was definitely interested in like the human person, and I feel like God's created us so beautifully. And I did already feel at a young age that there was a lot of confusion around food and what we should eat. They were talking a lot on TV. I remember as a child about the obesity rates going up and all of these issues and problems we were having with chronic diseases. And so through prayer and discernment, I decided to go to Texas A&M University and study nutrition to become a registered dietitian and try to help with some of these, I guess, issues we were having. On top of that, there was a part of me that wanted to solve this conundrum of weight loss and my own stomach issues that I'd had throughout childhood. So I thought, okay, if I enjoy science, I enjoy this, I might as well study it and see where it takes me. And so I did. And then at college, everything was going well. I was learning more and more cool facts, and my poor roommates, I got to hear about extensively how our metabolism works and all the great vitamins and minerals there are. And yeah, and I guess for me, there was this turning point when I was a sophomore in college. I also really felt called to do some sort of mission work. And I remember being in adoration one morning. We had different hours. And so I happened to have the 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. hour. And I remember just hearing the voice of the Lord in my heart, just calling me and telling me, go now, like do your mission work now. And because I just had this strong feeling that after I left college, I would get married and have children, and that opportunity and that freedom to go and do things might be different. So I went home and I prayed about it some more, and I went online and I found this outreach that was in Chicago, Illinois. It's a homeless shelter and soup kitchen. And as I was reading their website, at a certain point in the website, it started talking about doing the guests' laundry. So basically, one of the things we did on Wednesdays is we brought in all of the laundry and we did it. And I thought, what a beautiful gift, because how can you expect to get a job and move your life forward if you don't even have clean clothes? So a lot of our
Yeah.
guests would come in on Wednesdays, they would take showers while we did the laundry, and then we would send them off clean, basically. So at that moment, I remember sitting in my dorm room and just crying because I thought, wow, this is it. The Lord's calling me to go to Chicago to serve the homeless. And plus, it was a soup kitchen, and I was studying nutrition. And a part of being a dietitian is also like food service management. So, dietitians are also in charge of, I guess, the food service at facilities like schools and possibly nursing homes and other facilities, right? So I thought, okay, this is a great fit. Let's go ahead and do it. And kind of going on in the background, I had a little bit of an emotional eating issue. So I would try to eat healthy, what I thought was healthy, which was still the lower fat, uh, sparing protein. Make sure it's lean. Make sure you have lots of salads and lots of vegetables and lots of colors. And I was trying to eat this way, but when I would get stressed, sometimes I would find myself like binging on oatmeal or eating larger amounts of popcorn, things that in my mind I thought was healthy enough. But it was something that was there, but there wasn't a magnifying glass on it, I'd say. It was just sort of in the background. So anyway, I went ahead and signed up and I was accepted with this program. And so I flew to Chicago and I lived in the city, and I lived on the third floor of this building. We called it the Marquard Center. And on the third floor is where all of the volunteers lived. And then the second floor is where we had the showers and the laundry facility I was just referring to. And then we also had case management where we had staff that would bring in our guests, our homeless guests, and help them find jobs, help them find programs that might help with different types of addiction, just other services like that. And then on the first floor is where we had the actual large dining room and then a large kitchen and a walk-in freezer and whatnot. So I start serving the homeless. And I'm expecting, so I'm coming from Texas A&M, kind of a place where Catholicism and living out our faith is just a beautiful thing at St. Mary's Catholic Church there. And I was used to going to retreats and, being with my friends, and we would study the catechism together or have different types of Bible study or sing the Chaplet of Thy Mercy or pray the rosary or go to mass. So we had all of these beautiful practices that we did as a community. And so when I went to this community, it was called Franciscan Outreach Association, and I was expecting it to be the same. I was expecting to have like-minded individuals who were steeped in their Catholic traditions and faith, and that's not what I found. There was very beautiful souls there. However, I would say maybe one or two of them were actually practicing Catholics. And so I found myself in a very lonely place because all of the ideas and ideals that I had that I thought were true, all of a sudden, everyone that I was surrounded by was saying what was right was wrong and what was wrong was right. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's kind of our society as a whole right now.
Yeah. So,
like.
and looking back, it feels a little confusing for me because I deeply love all of them. We'd actually just had a reunion a couple of weeks ago, and I got to see everyone and give everyone hugs and catch up and see how life is. And I still to this day have tremendous respect. We have in common. We all loved the guests. We all loved serving the homeless. We loved the dignity that we helped convey, and the fact that they deeply touched our lives. That just realizing that, sorry, I'm going to get emotional, but when you see people on the street, it was interesting because I used to go running a lot when I lived in Chicago, and I wasn't afraid because as I'm running, like all the homeless people that you see on the street, I knew their name and I knew their story and I saw them at night and it was like, hey, are you coming to dinner tonight? It's like they were, in a way, they were family, right?
Yeah.
So but when I got there, it was this struggle, right? So I was out of my comfort zone. I was in a completely new city, a new environment. All of the parameters that I had on my own habits and behaviors were gone. I was in this homeless shelter the soup kitchen. The homeless shelter I actually worked in, it was down the street. I can't remember the name of it right now. It was like this huge warehouse. So I would go there a couple of times a week to serve in the women's facility. But at the soup kitchen, you would go down and we had a walk-in refrigerator and a walk-in freezer, and we would make rounds around the city where we would go to like Pizza Hut and can't remember if it was Cub's Food. So we would go to different grocery stores and different food facilities, and they would give us just boxes and boxes of pizza, or they would give us tons of cake or yogurt or ice cream, fill in the blank, any type of food that was about to go bad in their facility, they would donate to us. And then we would plan out menus and try to utilize this food. Well, it was made completely clear to us that since we were unpaid volunteers, that the food was not only for the guests, but it was also for us, because they gave us a small stipend to go to the grocery store, but a lot of these donations we could eat as well. So here I am stuck in this time in my life where you're 20 years old, trying to figure out who you are, what the world is like. You're thrown into this completely different culture shock, and you already have this unhealthy relationship with food, and it just it went off the rails, I guess, when I was there. And I didn't know how to deal with my feelings. I would try to have conversations about theological things and hit walls over and over again. And at some point, I think I was starting to feel like, am I going crazy? Like, is there no one who agrees with any of the things that I'm thinking or saying? And then in order for me to cope with it, I ended up eating. And I remember one night in particular sitting, we'd already had dinner, everyone was out of the room, and I remember just sitting there eating until I literally had to crawl to bed. Like I could not walk. That is how stuffed I was. And I remember crawling to my bed, crying, and I fell asleep. And the next morning I would run and I would go running around the city literally for hours, like 1 to 2 hours every morning, because I was at the same time, I was also very afraid of getting fat. And so I could never make myself throw up, luckily, but I would run as my sort of purge. And I remember running and just beating myself up in my head and calling myself a slob and a terrible person. And I was just in a very dark place, and no one knew. I mean, I wasn't in a place where I felt like I could tell anyone. I was very embarrassed about it. I felt, yeah, I was ashamed. Um, and I just remember sitting in the chapel. We had a chapel on the second floor, praying the rosary every morning and just begging God, like, please just take this away. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to make it stop. I'm trying my best, but I seem like every day I'm just failing. And so, yeah, there were moments that got better, but overall it just got worse and worse until finally I made the call to end my time there a little bit early. So I think I left maybe 2 months before I was supposed to and came back to Texas. Um, so yeah, that's the basic gist of the story. And it was interesting when I went back to visit, because it's been 20 years since this happened. And a friend of mine, she set up this beautiful reunion where we would all get back together 20 years later. And I just had some really emotional journal entries. And you think like it was 20 years ago, so long ago. But it was interesting, literally like standing outside the building where I lived, and unfortunately it's not a soup kitchen anymore. It was purchased by a company and they changed it into apartment buildings or apartments inside the building. But just remembering the guests that I encountered and remembering all of the conversations I had, walking up and down the streets where I used to live. Yeah, it brought a lot of things back, but I think being there as an adult, seeing it with new eyes, it was just a beautiful experience, a healing experience almost. So yeah, I guess I continue the story on. As soon as I come back to Texas, my eating disorder, my binge eating, I would say it got probably 75 or 80% better just by coming back to home and being surrounded by my friends and other people who held a lot of the same values that I had. But it was always there in the background. And I was always trying to search for, like, I remember in Chicago coming down the steps one afternoon, and I saw one of our guests there, and he had stumbled in intoxicated. And we had this rule that if you were drunk, that you could not come in and have dinner because you could be a potential threat to the safety of everyone else there. And I remember watching the priest talk to him and let him know that he wasn't allowed inside. And I just had this moment of realization that this man and I were suffering from the exact same thing. Like, we were both addicted. It was just he was addicted to alcohol and I was addicted to food. And I remember feeling humbled by realizing that we were in the same place, and also realizing that the only difference between him and I is that I had family and I had resources and I had kind of a security net that maybe wasn't there for him. And yeah, he I'm tearing up because he actually passed away later that same year while we were there together.
Sorry.
Yeah, but that moment of humility and knowing that we all suffer and we're all the same in a lot of ways was just a huge God moment for me. And knowing that God loves me just like God loves him, right? And
Absolutely, yeah.
knowing that I need help, right? And so, and in order to move forward, you have to recognize your need and then ask for help, right? So, yeah, I remember even before I left, I went to like an Overeaters Anonymous meeting while I was in Chicago, and I remember having a sponsor there. And she was, gosh, she only had to be in her 30s, maybe. She was young. She was a beautiful lady. She approached me and asked me if I was okay with her being my sponsor. And I said, yes. I remember at one point she had me over to her house, and she lived in a beautiful house in Chicago, and she had a husband and a couple of kids. And the way she was acting, she was not in the midst of an eating disorder at all. And I remember looking at her and thinking, wow, I don't know I don't think I can ever be there, right? How can I ever be where she's at? And thank God
Almost
now I
like
look back.
you like don't have hope that that's even
Yeah,
possible.
right. And you can't fathom it. But luckily I look back at my life and I'm there, and so praise God, right? And
Yes. Amen.
amen. So yes, so I guess when I came back home, I still had some of the same tendencies, but over time, I realized, like, I was in despair because you can think to yourself, okay, if I'm addicted to alcohol, well, then I just make a commitment not to eat alcohol or drink alcohol anymore, and I structure my life so that that is not something that I partake in, right? And so I was really confused because I thought to myself, well, I can't not eat. I can't just be like, I'm just never going to eat again. you know and I thought
Exactly.
so
That's
it
yeah.
yeah, so I was like, I don't know what to do. And so that led me down a path of a search of, okay, there has to be a way to eat in order that I can be healthy and food can sustain me and nourish me, but not to be addicted to food. And the more research and experimentation I did on myself, I finally came to the conclusion that I'm number one, I was addicted to processed foods. So I had to completely eliminate those from my diet. So any type of food that you find like chips or cakes or things that comes in bags and boxes, pasta, those type of things. So like high carbohydrate foods, to me, cause me to want to eat more and more of them, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then I everyone has their own path, but I remember at some point I heard about like the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give those a shot. And I remember for me, I went and tried out the carnivore diet for 63 days, where for 63 days I ate absolutely nothing but meat products and animal products.
That's
And
intense.
say it again.
I said that's intense.
Yeah, it's intense. But for the first time in my entire life, I tasted freedom. Like there was always this voice inside of my head saying, you should eat this or not eat that, or don't eat too much, or whatever. It was constantly talking to me, trying to help me, I think. It was trying to guide me, but at the same time, if I messed up, then it would start to berate me, right? But as soon as I switched my diet to only the animal products and I didn't taste anything sweet, so I didn't use any type of artificial sweeteners or anything like that. I got that sweet taste out of my mouth, then those thoughts that clouded my brain just lifted. And I I I
Praise
thank the
God.
Lord because I was free. And I was like, wow, is this what normalcy is? Because I really like it if this is what it is, you know?
Yeah, sign
This
me up
is
for that.
sign me up. Sign me up. And so since then, I mean, I've gone back and forth as far as having sweets or having this or that back in my diet, and I've experimented with things. Not to say that I strictly just eat meat because I don't, but um, just tasting that freedom and realizing a few things. So I realized first that part of my craving for more and more food was probably that my body was hungry for nutrients that I wasn't getting. And so
Absolutely.
when you think about the human body, we have essential amino acids, which mean essential pieces of protein, and then we have essential fatty acids, which are essential fats. But there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Our body can create glucose, it can create fructose, it can create these carbohydrate type substances that we need, and it can make it from fat or some other substrate, right? And so what was happening is I was trying to do this lean protein, low fat, lots of fruits and vegetables type diet. And number one, I just wasn't eating enough calories. And so I was legitimately hungry. And then number two, I wasn't eating enough protein or fat to feel satiated and get what I was needing. And so in my desperation, I would turn to these lower fat, high carbohydrate foods because I thought they were healthier for me. But as soon as I wrap my mind around the fact that cholesterol is not scary, fats are actually good for us, and I allowed myself to enjoy them and eat them, then I wasn't battling an uphill fight, right? I actually felt full, I felt satisfied, and the cravings went away, and it was something that was sustainable for me. Um, so yeah, and then it was also a shock because as a dietitian and learning about nutrition, I was taught to teach people the food guide pyramid, right? And I was taught to teach people like the absolute base of our meals are supposed to be whole grains. And
Yeah,
so,
like what does it say? Like 10 to 12 servings a day or something crazy
yes,
like that?
right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
no.
And the more I dug into it and then the more I explored it, the more I realized that the food guide pyramid is not necessarily created by scientists, and it has a lot of influence from food companies themselves, from lobbyists, those type of things. So it's more of a governmental thing than it is a scientific paradigm, I believe.
That's
Yeah.
And
sad.
so, right? And so
Yeah.
I when I discovered this, I just discovered so much freedom, and I discovered that there are things that are safe for me to eat. There are things that I'm not going to binge on. Like I can't binge on a ribeye steak, or I can't binge
No, you
on
can't.
I can't binge on brisket. Like you eat to the point where you're like comfortably stuffed, and you're like, ooh, okay, that's enough
No
food.
more. Yeah.
Um, but even then, you can ask anyone this. You can have your full plate of ribs, and then at the end, if someone brings out cake and ice cream, well, all of a sudden you have a second stomach, and you're like, oh, okay, I could probably do a little ice cream, which is an interesting phenomenon because our bodies have a stop point. They have hormones that tell us when we're hungry, and they also have hormones that tell us when we're full. And those hormones for being full are activated by eating fat and protein. They are not activated by eating carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates, if you look ancestrally, there's something that were in our diet at smaller amounts during certain times and for a particular purpose. So, for example, if we were, hunter gatherers, in the fall, you would have all of these apples or berries or nuts or whatever it is, and you would gorge yourself on those because once they're gone, they're gone. There's no refrigerator. And you might have days or maybe even a week or two where you have no food, right? And so it's super important to have that extra fat on your body so that when you're like starving or times of fasting, that you don't die. And so we're still built that way. It's just that our environment has changed so drastically that now the biggest problem is learning how to say no and what to say no to. And if you can master those skills, right, then there's freedom.
Absolutely. Well, and just that, like, we have access to food 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And like everything you said, like we have access to fruits and nuts constantly all year round, not just, during certain seasons when they're blooming or whatever. And then like for us in West Texas, where there are absolutely no fruit trees, the concept is lost on us because we've never seen a fruit tree bloom in our life, So it's like, I don't know what orange season is. I've never seen an orange tree, But
Yep, that's true.
yeah.
That's
And
true.
then there's so much, I think, misinformation. Becky, our family was so grateful you sat down with us after my dad had all that stuff with his heart. And we were hearing from the hospital here, about this cardiac diet he should have been on. And it's like everything they're telling him to eat is like not going to work for him at all, And we were just so blessed that you came and, shared with us a lot of the education that you received to help us guide him after having that. But it's just, I feel so bad for so many other people that are going to that same facility that are getting put on these cardiac diets. And it's like, this is not good. I don't know how we change that.
Well, I don't know if you guys know the story behind that. So, historically speaking, doctors used to know that when you ate carbohydrates, it caused your body to store fat. So, like I was talking about just a minute ago, eating the fruit causes you to store fat so that you have it for the winter. Well, so if you would go to the doctor even up until maybe like the 1950s and say that you wanted to lose weight, the answer was typically, well, stop the cakes and the cookies and the pastries, because if you stop eating all the carbs, then you'll lose weight. Well, back, I guess, around the 1950s, the president at the time had a heart attack. And so the country was really concerned about, we're having more heart attacks. Why? We don't understand. We need to figure out why. And so this man named Ansel Keys did what he calls the 7-country study, where he found a correlation in these 7 different countries between the amount of saturated fat that they ate and the amount of heart attacks that they had. And so he brought this information back to the United States, and he said, if we eat less saturated fat, then we will have less heart attacks. And so it became policy in the United States, and they actually started trying to educate people on this fact. Well, the problem with the 7-country study is that he actually didn't just do 7 countries. He studied 21 or 22 different countries, and he cherry picked his data, and he basically lied about this fact. And I'm not quite sure why he lied. I think it's because maybe he had the hypothesis and he wanted to make sure it was true. I'm not quite sure why he decided to do this, but there's books out there there's one called The Big Fat Surprise, where it's basically a reporter, and she goes in to try to study about this particular thing, and she was finding that a lot of people weren't answering her questions. And there's people in universities who got paid money to try to corroborate this idea that saturated fat is bad for us. And even to this day, if you go to most doctors and ask them about it, they'll tell you, make sure you don't eat very much butter, or don't eat the fat on meat because it'll give you heart disease. When in reality, what's happening is in your arteries, you there's damage, right? So if you eat too much sugar, you have too much inflammation, it causes damage inside of your arteries. And what they're seeing is that the cholesterol buildup is there. It's like blaming the firefighter for the fire. So the problem was already there. The cholesterol that's there is trying to fix it, but all we see is the cholesterol, and we're like, oh, that must be bad. So if we just eat food that doesn't have cholesterol in it, or fill in the blank, saturated fat, then we won't have these problems. When in reality, the real answer is we need to stop eating so much grains and carbohydrates that cause inflammation inside of our arteries, because the cholesterol is a molecule that your body can make. So even if you don't eat it, your body can still make it, and it will send it out to try to repair things. So yes, like you're saying, there is a lot of misinformation out there still, but there is this entire group of doctors and dietitians and all these people who are educated in one paradigm, and it's hard to shift to think that what we were told is actually not serving people, and it's not the truth.
Not helpful.
Wow.
Yeah, that's incredible. So Becky, can I ask you, just kind of going back to just part of what you shared, how you talked about just that moment of like tasting freedom. What advice would you give to someone to just help them heal their relationship with food? Or like you said, to invite the Lord into that space. Like you said, you would go and pray and you're like, Lord, just take this away. But he didn't necessarily do that. So there were some changes in circumstances that you were talking about. What would you say to someone that's, still in that place and is confused and struggling and hurting?
Well, first I would let them know that I love them and they're not alone. And there's nothing wrong with them, and they're not bad. And that God loves them. So I think I would start there. And then I would say, so something that was critical in my recovery was finding my now husband. But I remember when AJ and I started dating, and I finally opened up to him and told him that I had this issue, just having that other person who knew that I was struggling in this way, and having that person to talk to. Because a lot of times when I would have something emotional come up in my life, say I had a conversation that didn't go well or a hard day at work, I would usually come home and turn to food. But when I had AJ, I would come home and I would look at him and I would say, I feel like I want to eat everything in the kitchen. Can we talk? And just having that other person that I trusted, that understood, and would sit down with me and be like, okay, well, let's talk. And then I would talk about what was really bothering me. And by the end of the conversation, that intense drive to go and eat might not be gone completely, but it was greatly lessened. Right. And it was having that other person that would notice if I was sitting there eating Oreo after Oreo and be like, are you okay? Do you need a talk? So I guess number one would be find someone that you trust that you can talk to. If you don't have anyone yet, there are resources out there that I can talk about too that can give you someone you trust. Number two is maybe look at your diet, and you could actually make a chart for yourself with 3 types of food. So you have the the people call it different names. So you can call it green, yellow, and red. So the green foods are the foods that you can eat that don't cause you any type of abdominal symptoms, and they don't cause you to binge on them. So for me, that looks like meat and vegetables. Those are my green foods. And then you have your yellow foods, which are some people call calm foods are your green foods, confusing foods could be yellow, and then red foods could be like chaos foods. So the confusing foods for me, for example, would be a lot of dairy foods. Like I don't, I wouldn't say I binge on them. I eat more of them than I probably should sometimes, and they cause me abdominal distress. But so that for me, that would be like a yellow food. And then red foods would be like eating ice cream or cakes or cookies and stuff like that. So that's another tool that you can use is just come up with your whatever words you want to use for it. But the idea is safe foods, so calm foods, confusing foods, chaotic foods, and kind of make a list for yourself and tell yourself, okay, I can eat as much of as I want of these calm foods, and then maybe add in a little of the confusing foods if I feel like it, but try to stay away from the chaos foods. And whatever's on your chaos food list, as much as possible, try to eliminate those foods from your environment. Because if it's not in your pantry, it's not in your refrigerator, you have to go out and buy it. It's a lot harder to get a hold of it. And then as much as you can, let the people in your life know what you're going through so that they can support you. Because I know you have people in your life who love you and want you to be happy and healthy. And so I guess starting there would be where I would say someone can go.
And how would you say, because I think a lot of us don't like to admit to the people that we love that we're struggling or that we're having a hard time. Um, what would you say that first step would look like? So if that's me and I'm in this situation and I have friends and I have family that love me, but there's also that like, I don't want to disappoint you or I don't want you to think less of me. What would be like one of the first things they could say, or how would you approach that conversation?
That's a great question. Thinking back to when I had to do that with AJ, I remember sitting on the couch next to him, and I remember telling him that there's something that I need to talk to you about me that you need to know, and I need to know that you won't judge me. And trying to bring it up like that so that I feel like there might be some sort of safety net, right? Like, so the
Yeah.
person knows that you're sharing an intimate part of yourself with them, like something that you're struggling with, right? And that they won't make a rash judgment. Um, that's where I started with it. I mean, the other thing that I did before I did that is there are groups like Overeaters Anonymous. Um, gosh, there's another one called FA, Food Addicts, maybe. So there are some groups there out there that you can find. There's also another group out there called the ARC, Addiction Reset Community, that you could look up. And there's people who even have like online meetings. So if you're not ready to tell someone in your life about it, you can look up some of those other resources. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. But what they offer is this community of other people who understand what it feels like and what you're going through. And sometimes that can be super helpful because I mean, my husband is wonderful and he does a great job of listening and understanding me, but he does not struggle with the same thing I do, right? So he
Yeah.
eats processed foods and he feels fine afterwards, and he doesn't have this voice in his head that's telling him to eat more and more and more and more of it, right?
Yeah.
So we're all different, right? So if you find a community like that, then you automatically have people that you can trust. So yeah, I would say you can probably start there. So from all of my knowledge and experience and everything I've studied, um, recently I've started a health coaching group called Christian Health Coaching. So christianhealthcoaching.org. And there I offer different packages for group coaching, one-on-one coaching, that type of thing. So if you feel connected and want to reach out in that space, I would love to talk to anyone who would like to talk. And I'm completely excited about having any type of free consultation, just to let you know that you're not alone, that there's people who understand, and to see what group or what coaching might work best for you. So
Thank you so much for doing this interview with us. I guess as I was preparing for this interview, I did have the question of like, okay, like, well, why is this so important? And I was just trying to pray with that, and it just this has opened my eyes to like a lot of things. I especially when you said that you went out running and you had all those voices in your head and you were feeling really really low, and that a lot of like no one knew what was going on. I feel like that's very real in our society right now. A lot of us probably go through that, and we don't exactly know that we're going through that, or we cannot articulate that. We cannot tell people about it. And I think it's really important that we open up with the ones who love us, and so we can address that issue. So thank you so much for that.
thank you.
Becky, one of the other things you had mentioned was when you were out of your comfort zone and you had gone to Chicago, you're in a new place, you're with new people, there's people that don't necessarily, share the faith or that you can relate to. And that 75 to 80% of those issues were resolved just by moving home. So it's like kind of in that space, in that chaos, and they can't necessarily like move or go back to where their comfort zone is. Would you have any advice on just maybe how to maybe start with one thing, like one single thing that they could start with if they are in that space where there's essentially no comfort or no place to turn almost?
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent question, because my first thing would just be to say, I mean, I just needed to move out of the soup kitchen because I had access to so many processed foods, right? And on top of that, I didn't have the knowledge that that was the problem. And I didn't have a game plan at all as to what foods that I could eat that were safe. So I feel like if you are in that situation and you can't leave, right? At least you hear my voice right now, and you can definitely 100% reach out to me, and I will talk to you, and come up with some sort of plan to help you. Because my my first my first tip would be to realize that processed foods are addictive. They are designed to be addictive. They're formulated to be that way. I believe in like the 1980s, three of the big tobacco companies bought out several food company. And they took the food companies and they put the cigarette addiction model and they laid it on top of food companies. So like before the 1980s, snack food wasn't a thing. And so you have to realize that these foods are designed by scientists to be addictive. So the fact that you're addicted to them is nothing to be ashamed of. Like I like the saying, it's not your fault at this point, but it is your problem. Right? You didn't
Yeah.
cause
Yeah.
this, but you have to take the steps forward to realize like, okay, there is freedom on the other side of this. So number one, I would say, as much as you can, try to control what processed foods or what foods you have in your environment. And I know some people can't because they're with family, but at that point, you can at least have a conversation and say, you guys can eat these foods if we can eat them outside of this house, because you need a safe place where food around you is, you have safe food around you, so that when you are stressed, you don't have access to those types of foods. So that would be number one, if you can. Number two would be go and seek out an OA meeting, an FA meeting, or some sort of online support group, to try to find other people with the same issue so that you can talk through how you're feeling. And number 3, just frequent confession, pray the rosary, go to mass. Just keep your relationship with Jesus, because he knows where you're at. He knows where your heart's at. He is the answer to all of our prayers. And he's here to give us life. And so I would say turn to the sacraments, stay close to Jesus, and as much as you can, try to make your environment safe for yourself. And yeah, find support somehow. Find support.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And Becky, can you just share your website one more time?
Sure. The website is www.christianhealthcoaching.org.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Any final words or thoughts that you want to share?
I heard something today that I thought was really great. It's a quote, and I don't know who said it, but basically to remind yourself that snacking is an emotional event. So if you're snacking, that's if you're legitimately hungry, then you need to sit down and actually eat a meal and eat until you're full. It is okay to be full. It is my big message to people is it is okay to eat natural fats, like real fats. I'm not talking about processed seed oils or anything like that, but real fats are good. Real meat is good. And it's okay to feel full. So yeah, that's my last thought is that like if you're snacking, that's an emotional event. And then I really love, there's a great quote by, I believe it's St. Augustine, and it says, treat your body as if you're going to live forever, and treat your soul as if you're going to die tomorrow. And to just keep that in the forefront of our minds, that this body, this vessel that we're in, is truly a gift from God, that we are stewards of it to take care of it. But at the end of the day, God cares infinitely more about our soul and making sure that when we pass, that we will be with him for eternity. So,
Amen. Beautiful, sister. Thank you.
all right. All right. Well, thank you guys. It was really great to talk.
Yes, thank you too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
All right.
so this is it for today's episode of the Memento Mori Fight Club. Remember, nothing is wasted.
Keep fighting the good fight.